Priscilla Presley has spent most of her life in the public eye. This morning, she's looking back at those tumultuous decades. Once again, here's Lee Cowan.
Under the heat of the Memphis sun, in the summer of 1977, Graceland stood as both sanctuary and prison for Elvis Presley. Inside those gates, the man who had once set the world ablaze with his voice and charisma was living through his final days. His body, once agile and powerful, now bore the weight of years spent under the pressure of fame. The sparkle that once electrified audiences was dimmed by exhaustion, illness, and the burden of being more than just a man, being a legend. To the outside world, Elvis was still the king, the idol who had shaken music to its core and given birth to a movement. But within the quiet halls of Graceland, his reality was far different. His health had begun to betray him. He found himself often short of breath, his body slowed, and his spirit weighed down by a fatigue he could never truly escape. He still dreamed of the stage, of feeling the roar of an audience, but even simple acts became battles. He pushed himself for his fans, for the love of performing, though deep down he knew the fight was slipping away from him. The walls of his home held the laughter of the past, the echoes of family gatherings, and the warmth of moments he had cherished. Yet in that last summer, the silence seemed heavier than ever. Friends and family would visit, and Elvis would smile, share stories, even laugh at times. But when they left, he often fell into quiet solitude. He was not only carrying the weight of his failing body, but the silent wounds of his heart. Love, so abundant in his life, always seemed fleeting. His marriage to Priscilla had ended, but their bond endured. He leaned on her for strength and understanding, though he could not return to what once was. Beside him now was Ginger Alden, his fiancée, who offered tenderness and companionship. Still, a sense of loneliness lingered, a longing for something lasting and complete. Nights at Graceland became long stretches of pacing through dim hallways, moments of restless reflection when the world around him slept. The man who had once commanded arenas now wandered in shadows, his thoughts turning inward. He sometimes turned to writing, not the songs that had crowned him king, but words he wrote only for himself. These private notes revealed a man wrestling with regret, longing, and an unshakable desire for peace. They were confessions inked into quiet hours, as if by writing them he could free himself from the burdens of a life lived so intensely. In those last months, rumors began to circulate of one letter in particular, a letter written not for fans, not for history, but for love. Those closest to him whispered about pages filled with his handwriting, words heavy with finality. Some claimed it had been left on a bedside table, waiting to be found. Others believed it had been tucked away somewhere private, hidden from the world. The mystery deepened with every retelling, the question lingering. Who was the letter meant for? Some believed it was written for Priscilla, the woman who had shared his brightest days and darkest nights. Their marriage had ended, but their bond had never broken. She had been there through it all, supportive, steady, and honest in ways few others could be. Perhaps the letter was his way of telling her that his love never truly faded, that even through separation, a part of him still belonged to her. Others believed it was written for Ginger Alden, his final companion, and the woman he had promised a future to. She had stood by him in his last months, witnessing both his strength and fragility. Perhaps his last words were meant to assure her of the depth of his love, even as his time slipped away. And yet, there were those who wondered if the letter was meant not for one, but for all. The family who stood by him, the friends who supported him, or even the fans who had lifted him higher than he could have ever imagined. The uncertainty only made the letter more haunting. Its mystery turned it into something greater than words. It became a symbol of the man behind the crown. Through fragments of his private writings over the years, a picture of Elvis emerged. He had scribbled prayers when he felt weak, confessions when loneliness overwhelmed him, and words of gratitude when he felt lifted by love or faith. These were not the writings of a superstar, but of a man searching for solace. The final letter seemed to gather all of these emotions into one last powerful voice. His handwriting carried both strength and tremor, each word deliberate, filled with the weight of goodbye. In the letter, he admitted his regrets, the choices that had wounded those he cared for, the moments when fame had distracted him from what mattered most. Yet he wrote, without bitterness. There was a quiet acceptance, as though he wanted his last words to show truth rather than perfection. Alongside regret was gratitude. He thanked those who had offered him love, even when he faltered, those who had lifted him in times of struggle. He wrote of his daughter, who brought him joy, and of the family and friends who had been constants in his world. He also wrote of longing, not for the roar of the stage or the adoration of crowds, but for something simpler. He longed to be remembered not only as a legend, but as a man who loved deeply, who stumbled and searched, who gave as much of his heart as he could. In his most vulnerable words, he left a promise that love never truly dies. He believed it would live on, carried in memory, in music, in the bonds he had formed, even as his body gave way to silence. The discovery of the letter struck those who read it like a final chord. Family members, already shattered by his passing, found themselves overwhelmed by the intimacy of his words. They saw the man they had loved, stripped of glamour, speaking from the depths of his soul. Friends felt the same, a reminder that beneath the image of the king was someone who had always sought peace, tenderness, and connection. For them, the letter was both comfort and heartbreak. It gave them a final glimpse of Elvis the man, even as it reminded them of the loss they could never undo. The letter reshaped how many remembered his final days. No longer were they defined only by tragedy, silence, and decline. They became a chapter marked by vulnerability and love. His last words showed that even in his final hours, he carried warmth and gratitude, leaving behind more than a musical legacy. He left behind proof of his humanity. The mystery of who the letter was written for remains unsolved, and perhaps that is part of its power. It allows every person who loved Elvis to imagine it was meant for them, a piece of his heart shared across time. The king may have left the stage, but his words linger, carrying the same tenderness as his music. In the end, his legacy was not just the songs that shook the world, but the reminder that behind the legend stood a man who loved, who hoped, and who longed for peace. His music will echo forever, but his final words, hidden in that letter, will remain the quiet heartbeat of his story. A reminder that love outlives everything. Elvis Presley, the man the world still calls the king of rock and roll. But behind the flashing cameras, sold-out arenas, and thunderous applause, Elvis spent his final days at Graceland battling loneliness, pain, and the weight of his own legend. It's said that during those last days, Elvis wrote a hidden letter, a private note never meant for the stage or the spotlight. In it, he poured out his deepest thoughts, his regrets, his gratitude, and his longing for real peace. Some believe this letter was meant for Priscilla, his first and greatest love. Others say it was written for Ginger Alden, the woman by his side at the end. And then there are those who believe it wasn't for one person at all, but for everyone who had ever loved him, cheered for him, or kept his music alive. The truth about that letter may never be fully known, but one thing is clear. Elvis Presley's final words were not about fame, money, or glory. They were about love, about thanks, and about a man searching for peace. His music will live forever, but his last revelation still haunts the world.